I stood there in the community center, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like they always do in these kinds of places, and I didn't raise my voice even a little. The HOA board was all lined up behind their folding table, paper scattered. The president, a woman named Marlene with that perpetual squint of suspicion, leaning forward like she was about to declare victory. She'd just finished explaining how they'd sold off a chunk of what they called unused association land to some developer friend of hers, and now they were demanding I vacate my cabin because, according to them, it sat on property that no longer belonged to me. The room was packed with neighbors, some nodding along, others shifting uncomfortably in their metal chairs. I waited until she paused for breath. Then I slid the envelope across the table. It was thick, stamped with the Department of Veterans Affairs seal, and inside was the federal protection order I'd secured years ago. Marlene's lawyer, a sweaty guy in a cheap suit, snatched it up first, his eyes scanning the page, and I watched the color drain from his face as he realized what it meant. The land wasn't theirs to sell. It was mine, locked under veteran homestead protections from my service days, and any transaction they'd made was null and void. No fireworks, no shouting, just the quiet thud of reality hitting them square in the chest. It hadn't always been like this undercurrent of tension humming through every interaction. Back when I first moved out here to the edge of the subdivision, about 15 years ago now, I was looking for nothing more than a soft landing after too many years in uniform. I'd served 20 in the Army, mostly logistics and supply chain in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, where the dust never settles and the nights stretch on forever. When I got out, I was beat, physically from the deployments, emotionally from losing buddies along the way. My grandfather had left me this plot of land in his will, a rugged 20 acres backing up against the national forest in rural Virginia, with a small cabin he'd built himself after Korea. It wasn't fancy, rough-hewn logs, a tin roof that sang in the rain, a wood stove for heat, and a porch overlooking a creek that ran cold and clear year-round. I spent my first months there just breathing, waking up to birds instead of alarms, splitting wood for the fire, planting a vegetable garden that actually grew without someone telling me it violated regs. I'd fish in the afternoons, pulling trout from the stream, and grill them over an open pit with a bay in hand, watching the sun dip behind the hills. Neighbors were distant but friendly enough, waves from passing trucks, the occasional shared fence repair. I wasn't social. I didn't join the HOA meetings or volunteer for committees. After all I'd seen overseas, I just wanted the quiet, the space to heal without anyone poking into my business. The land felt like a promise kept, a piece of stability in a world that had spun too fast for too long. I fixed up the cabin bit by bit, insulating the walls, installing solar panels for off-grid power, even registering it under veteran land grant programs to keep taxes low and protections high. It was my sanctuary, plain and simple, and for a while, that's all it needed to be. The trouble started small, the way these things often do, creeping in like fog off the creek. It was late spring of 2022, and I'd been called back for a short stint as a civilian contractor. Nothing combat-related, just training new recruits on supply protocols at a base in Texas. I was gone maybe 6 months, long enough to miss the tanning leaves, but not so long that I'd expected the world to shift under me. When I got back, there was a notice stapled to my cabin door, bright yellow paper flapping in the wind, from the HOA. It claimed I'd violated some covenant about unmaintained structures and demanded I pay a $500 fine for not attending the annual meeting where they'd voted on new rules. I stared at it for a minute, confused more than anything. My cabin wasn't even part of their subdivision proper. It was on the periphery, grandfathered in from when the development expanded in the 90s. The HOA had formed later, mostly for the cookie-cutter houses down the road, with their manicured lawns and matching mailboxes. But apparently, they decided to loop in my acreage because it shared a boundary line. The notice cited overgrown brush near the fence and an unauthorized gravel path I'd laid to my driveway. It felt absurd, like being ticketed for breathing in your own backyard. I remember peeling it off the door, the staple leaving a scar in the wood, and feeling this quiet knot form in my gut. Not anger yet, just a sense of intrusion, like someone had walked through my living room without knocking. I figured it was a misunderstanding, the kind you sort out with a polite conversation. So I emailed the board, attaching a scan of my grandfather's original deed from 1958, which clearly showed the cabin and land as separate from any future developments. I explained I'd been away on work, apologized for the missed meeting even though I wasn't a dues-paying member, and offered to trim the brush if it was bothering anyone. No response for 2 weeks. Then another notice arrived, this time certified mail, upping the fine to $1,000 and threatening a lien on my property if I didn't comply. I tried again, this time calling Marlene directly. She was the president, elected unopposed for years. From what I gathered, her voice on the phone was clipped, like she was doing me a favor by picking up. "Rules are rules," she said, without even hearing me out. "If you want to live here, you follow them." I asked for a meeting, cited the county zoning map that exempted legacy properties like mine, but she brushed it off, saying the board had expanded jurisdiction based on a vote I'd missed. That's when the escalation hit. More fines rolled in, for things like my solar panels being eyesores and my truck parked too close to the road. Neighbors I'd waved to before started avoiding eye contact, one even whispering that Marlene had a grudge against outsiders who didn't contribute. It wore on me, not in an explosive way, but like sandpaper on skin, constant, irritating. My partner at the time, Sarah, noticed it too. She'd visit on weekends, and we'd talk about it over coffee on the porch, her worrying about the stress triggering my old PTSD episodes. I didn't snap, didn't storm a meeting. Instead, that knot in my gut tightened into resolve. I stopped emailing pleas and started printing out every document I could find. Old surveys, tax records, even the federal Veteran Land Protection Affidavit I'd filed back in 2010 under the Veterans Benefits Act, which safeguarded homesteads for service members against local encroachments. From there, it became a ritual, almost therapeutic in its precision. I'd sit at the kitchen table after dark, the cabin lit by a single lamp, poring over legal databases on my laptop, free access through the VA portal. Thank God for that. I learned about easements, adverse possession laws, and how federal protections trump state or local HOA covenants, especially for land tied to military service. My grandfather had claimed this plot under the Homestead Act extensions for veterans post-WWII, and I'd renewed it when I inherited, adding layers of federal oversight because of my own service. It meant the land couldn't be rezoned, sold, or liened without VA approval, designed to protect guys like me from losing what little stability we had after tours. I started documenting everything meticulously. Photos of the notices with timestamps, recordings of phone calls, legal in Virginia, one-party consent, even drone footage of the boundary lines to match the 1958 survey. Sarah helped at first, but as the fines piled up, now over $5,000 with interest, she grew anxious, suggesting we just pay or sell. But that wasn't an option. This was more than dirt and wood to me. It was the last tie to my grandpa, the man who taught me to tie flies and shoot straight, and it was my refuge after nights haunted by memories of convoys hit by IEDs. Isolation set in. Neighbors who'd once shared tools now crossed the street, probably fed stories by Marlene about me being a troublemaker. I'd lie awake some nights, not raging, but calculating, tracing the HOA's own bylaws for loopholes. I requested public records from the county clerk, uncovering that the HOA had overstepped before, fining folks for minor infractions to fund improvements that suspiciously benefited board members. And then, in one of those late-night digs, I hit gold. An old federal registry showing my land included a historic easement for forest access, protected under environmental veteran clauses. That's when I knew I had them. I didn't celebrate. I just filed for a formal VA reclamation review. Quiet as a shadow. We cycled back to that community center meeting in the fall of 2023, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and tension. The board had called it to announce the sale of surplus land, my land, as it turned out. While I'd been away on that contractor gig, Marlene and her cronies had pushed through a vote to sell off what they deemed undeveloped association property to a developer planning condos. They'd even had a surveyor redraw lines, conveniently ignoring my deed. The room buzzed with murmurs as Marlene boasted about the revenue it would bring for new playgrounds or whatever. I waited my turn to speak, standing up slowly, my voice steady like I was briefing a CEO. "Before you celebrate," I said, "you might want to review this." And there it was, the envelope. The lawyer flipped through the pages, the VA protection order, the federal homestead affidavit, the environmental impact clause tying the land to veteran conservation programs. It detailed how any sale without federal consent was invalid, and worse, it triggered penalties for fraudulent conveyance under Title 38 of the U.S. Code. Marlene stammered something about misunderstandings, but the lawyer shushed her, his face ashen as he realized the developer deal was toast, and the HOA could face counterclaims for harassment. The reveal wasn't dramatic. No one gasped aloud. But I saw it in their eyes. The shift from smug control to dawning panic. I presented it all with copies for everyone, including the county attorney who'd shown up as a formality. The meeting dissolved into whispers, Marlene avoiding my gaze as she gathered her papers with shaking hands. It was surgical, the way truth cuts without a blade. In the weeks that followed, the fallout unfolded like a slow unraveling thread. The developer backed out immediately, citing the federal red flags, and sued the HOA for misrepresentation, racking up legal fees that drained their reserves. Marlene resigned quietly, amid whispers of embezzlement investigations. Turns out some of those improvements had padded her pockets. The board dissolved the expansion clauses, rewriting bylaws to exclude legacy properties like mine, and the fines against me were voided with a formal apology letter from the new interim president. Neighbors started nodding again, a few even stopping by with awkward regrets, saying they'd been misled. Sarah and I parted ways not long after. She couldn't handle the stress, but I found peace in the solitude, rebuilding what the ordeal had chipped away. The cabin stands stronger now, with reinforced boundaries and a fresh coat of stain on the logs. I fish the creek most mornings, the water murmuring secrets it keeps to itself, and the quiet has returned, deeper than before. They wave when I drive by these days, or they look away. Either suits me fine. It's my land, protected not just by paper, but by the weight of what I've earned, and no petty tyrant will touch it again.